Good afternoon, Chamber members. For those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Sabrina Binkley. Welcome again to our live streamed Chamber Luncheon. I am the head of school at Spruce Tree Montessori and chair of this year's Fairbanks Chamber Board of Directors. I'd like to take a moment, as we do each week, to thank our executive partners whose logos you saw on the screen before we began our program today. Not only are these members the backbone of the Fairbanks Chamber's advocacy efforts, they are the kinds of businesses that our community depends on most, both in the best of times and the most challenging times. The Fairbanks Chamber greatly appreciates their support and partnership, no matter the season. A full list of our executive partners can be found on our website. And now we'll start with introductions of new and renewing guests and recognition. Brenna.
Thank you, Sabrina. We'd like to thank the renewing members 3-Tier Alaska, Professional Pharmacy, the Air Force Association Midnight Sun Chapter, Tanana Yukon Historical Society, and Morningstar Ranch. We'd also like to thank our 110% Club, which means that members have gone above and beyond their membership investment to support the Chamber. And we're welcoming Gold Standard Real Estate to that club today. Today's membership minute focuses on looking local when you are looking for equipment to reopen your business or to continue business. We've been seeing that a lot of businesses are trying to order online, and that is fantastic if you can find things in bulk online, but sometimes it'll take longer for it to arrive to Alaska with the shortages going on with hand sanitizer or maybe PPE. So we have heard that a lot of local organizations and businesses do have the supplies that are needed to reopen businesses, like masks, hand sanitizer that they have on hand that they can sell in bulk, everything from face shields that they can make in their new pivoted business model, and then also structures that can be a barrier between customers and employees. So if you're looking for local resources, please contact the Chamber staff like myself or any of us, and we can help direct you to find those. We've been finding lots of different places that you can find them, so we hope to share those with you. Thank you, and back to you, Sabrina.
Great. Thank you so much, Brenna. In light of our desire to give as much time as possible to today's program, I'll keep my announcements short. The board will be meeting next Monday. We'll hear a presentation from our accountant at RJG as she presents the Fairbanks Chamber 2019 financial review for approval by our board. I wanted to remind our membership today, as well as those listening from the broader community, that when our Chamber contingent went to Juneau in February for our annual Juneau fly-in, we had lunch with the governor, and he pitched us on the idea that our Chamber should develop perhaps a resolution that he could use to demonstrate the support of Alaskans for responsible development of our many resources, creating economic stability for our state and jobs for Alaskans. Our Government Relations Committee had full board support for the resolution we finalized a few weeks ago. It supports the development and balanced management of Alaska's natural resources, including energy, minerals, forestry, wildlife, fisheries, and agriculture, all the while protecting Alaska for future generations. The full text of our resolution can be found on the Chamber website in the Advocacy Action section. With that, I'll pass the baton to Marissa for her President and CEO report. Marissa?
Thank you so much, Sabrina. I've got 5 quick announcements today. The first one is actually coming from Eielson Space. So the F-16 Fighting Falcon and F-35 Lightning II aircraft assigned to the 354th Wing are scheduled to honor frontline COVID-19 responders and essential workers with a flyover of Fairbanks Memorial Hospital in downtown Fairbanks on Friday, May 15th, that's this Friday, at 10 a.m. That flyover is part of an Air Force Salutes initiative designed to show appreciation to the countless heroes around the world battling this pandemic. The Fairbanks flyover additionally celebrates the bond between Eielson Air Force Base and the Fairbanks North Star Borough. A 3-ship formation of 2 F-35s and 1 F-16 will conduct the flyover, and an additional 2-seat F-16 aircraft will join the formation to visually document the flight. So everyone go outside at 10 a.m. on Friday and check that out. Should be a great salute to our healthcare workers and also a really great reminder about all the fantastic military activity happening in our region. On the Chamber front, we do have one event this week. It is, we'll be hosting our virtual coffee talk event So please grab your favorite morning beverage and join your fellow chamber members for business-minded conversation. This week's topic will be finding comfort in business and in the workplace. As many of us are easing back into the workplace with many changes and modifications, we think that this content will be very timely, and we look forward to a conversation. You can find participation information on our calendar or our website or in yesterday's edition of The Scoop. We'd also like to thank all of our chamber member businesses and other community members that registered for Cleanup Day. That was last week. We, instead of doing a Cleanup Day this year, we did Cleanup Week in an effort to socially distance ourselves from one another. We had 1,276 community members volunteer to clean up our city this past week. And those are just the people that told us that they were going to do it. I know that there are so many more that just went out and cleaned up without doing that registration process, which is fine. Hard to count those people. So just a tremendous effort on behalf of our whole community. And I know that Fairbanks and the surrounding area looks so much better for it. We want to send a big shout out and thank you to the steering committee that makes sure that this event happens every year. So that consists of Green Star of Interior Alaska, Midnight Sun Boy Scouts, Cowell's Heating, UAF, United Way of the Tanana Valley, the radio station, Fairbanks North Star Borough, Alaska DOT, and Explore Fairbanks. So thank you so much for your role, and obviously also the Fairbanks Chamber. And I'll give a shout out to Katie. Thank you so much for representing the Chamber on that committee. If you see yellow bags on the roadways that maybe got missed in the pickup process or were placed on the roadway after the pickup process, if you have the ability and the desire, you can pick those bags up and you can haul them off to the landfill. The landfill won't charge you for any of the road trash that's taken to the landfill through the end of the month. So they've waived those fees for folks, and we definitely encourage people, if you see bags on the roadway and you'd like to see them gone, feel free to throw them in the back of your pickup truck and get them taken over to the landfill. Just generally speaking, I think this is very timely in light of today's presentation. We just want you to know that if you're a business that's reopening as our community enters phase 2 of the Reopening Alaska Responsibly plan, if you've got questions or if you need help finding information or access to resources, please consider checking out our COVID section of our website. You can give me a call anytime or shoot me an email. And the state's got a really great website where they've got all of the current mandates and guidance documents for each phase of the reopening process relative to each sector. And I'm sure that our speaker today is going to cover that in detail. And then finally, my final announcement today is a reminder that the Fairbanks Chamber, Explore Fairbanks, FEDC, and the Downtown Association, we're all working collaboratively to support the economic recovery process for businesses here in Fairbanks. We launched a survey last week, and we're hoping that all businesses will respond in order to help us collect some baseline information and help guide our local response and efforts as we move forward. We understand that there's a lot of struggle, and while no one has all the answers, our organizations are definitely looking to be part of this forward-looking solution and help our community get back to business. So far, we've had over 120 businesses respond, and of those 120 businesses, slightly more than half of those businesses have opted to provide us with some public-facing information. So you can go onto this kind of interactive dashboard, and you can go and look and see which businesses are open, which ones are closed, and then which ones are open with some kind of modifications in their effort to serve their clients or customers. I definitely encourage the community to check out that dashboard so that you can get a feel for what the impacts to businesses have been so far. And then if you are a business owner, even if your business is closed or if it's under some kind of a modified operating status, please go in and fill out that survey so that our community can access that information and know which businesses are open and how to be a customer at your business. You can find information about everything that I just spoke about, all of our events and more, on our website at fairbankschamber.org. Back to you, Sabrina.
All right, thank you so much, Marissa. Lots going on still. Now for our main presentation, a much anticipated conversation with Ben Stevens. I'd just like to remind our viewers, if you're watching live, to please type your questions into the chat section and we'll share them with our presenter at the conclusion of his talk. The Fairbanks Chamber has been keeping up with the current mandates as well as staying informed about the phases of reopening our businesses and community responsibility. We're so happy to welcome Governor Dunleavy's Chief of Staff, Ben Stevens, today to inform us on the plans to reopen Alaskans' economy. Ben Stevens has had a strong career in Alaskan politics, but I think I'd be remiss as a hockey mom if I didn't mention that he also had a great hockey career, played on the East Coast, I think, before returning to Alaska. Stevens was appointed by Governor Tony Knowles to the Alaska State Senate in August of 2001. Stevens went on to serve as Alaska's Senate Majority Leader and later Senate President. Stevens is currently serving as Governor Dunleavy's Chief of Staff. Welcome, Senator Stevens, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sabrina. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, I can hear you, sir.
Okay, great. So I appreciate the chance to talk to the Fairbanks community, specifically the business community, as we move forward. And, you know, it's hard to imagine, you know, a few short months ago, Alaska was really at the peak of its economic activity. We had one of the fastest growing gross domestic products in the nation in 2019. We had historic low unemployment that was in place at the end of December, early January. We know the North Slope was percolating along. You know, in 19 we created 1,900 new jobs and increased wages by about 355 million. Was really the first positive signs we've seen in our economy in several years. And so now we're in a different circumstance. Next slide, please. And so if you take a look at this slide, you can see the unemployment picture in the nation. So this is the nation in general was working on some of the lowest unemployment rates we've ever seen. And so all of a sudden we have this coronavirus event sweep across the nation, across the globe. We've got 15% of Americans unemployed. We've got over 30% of businesses and individuals reporting a loss in income compared to last year. And so now we're trying to manage with the impacts of this virus, the national economy, in our state economy, and as we interact with the global economy. So it's really an unpredictable period of time we're in, and I think we've done a pretty good job of trying to understand how it's impacted Alaska. And there's no question, I don't think any of us can overlook that Alaska's done a pretty good job of maintaining the control of this virus and stop the spread. You know, we have a remote, isolated geographic location compared to other parts of the world. The governor imposed travel mandates early, travel restrictions, and I think we can all agree that that's had a significant impact on the fact that we haven't had a lot of spread through our community. Next slide, please. So if we look at the caseload now, you can see that the actives is going down, the recoveries is increasing, and the mortality rates is pretty much stable. We haven't had that for quite a while. And so as these caseloads trend downwards and the testing increases and we have recoveries outpacing new cases, these are all metrics that we keep in mind as the governor and as the chief medical officer and everyone makes determination on how well the mandates are working and how we can make sure that we can keep this issue contained in our society and quite frankly its impacts on our economy. You know, everybody complied voluntarily with these orders, and I think we can all take recognition of the fact that we've all sacrificed to keep Alaska in general at the forefront and at the top of the metrics in terms of, you know, lowest number of cases, lowest number of deaths per population as we look across, compare it to other parts of the nation. Next slide, please. So the question is, what do we do next, right? So vaccinations are still in the development phase. We think it may be up to a year and a half, maybe sooner if there's a vaccination. So that's really an uncertainty. It's unknown on what we can do. You know, the health impact is only part of the equation in Alaska, and actually in Alaska, it's a lesser of the impact compared to the economic impact that it's had on our society. But we all have to realize that the virus is a part of humanity now. It's a part of our society, and so we have to take a longer view and take a breather to understand, how we're going to deal with it as it moves forward. And so we're incorporating consultation with the Center for Disease Control at the national level, with the chief medical officer at the local level, with all the health providers, with the statistics that we're comparing not only to Alaska, but other parts of the U.S. And so those are all, like I said, things that are being incorporated into the decision-making process on how we try to move forward and minimize the impact of what's happening. So with that in mind, we have the short-term impacts that we're all responding to now, and then you have the mid and long-term impacts that we're trying to predict, and it's sort of an unpredictable era. The next slide, please. But you can see this is the sort of the 4-phase opening approach, and we're in phase 2 that the governor just announced on the 8th, just started. And so it's important to keep in mind that it's a 14-day time frame when we make an announcement to really when we wait to see how that change in the mandates has had the impact on the testing and on the positives and on the recovery rates that we see across the state. And the reason why the 14 days is important is because that's the time frame that the medical community has said that the virus can actually, someone could actually be infected and not know about it until the point to when they're shedding or when they're contagious, to the point to where it could move through your system without anybody even knowing it. And so that's an important 14-day time frame. And from where he started phase 1 to where we are now in phase 2, and so this weekend and early next week through next Wednesday, Thursday will be important as we look at the metrics and the testing. So over the weekend, this past weekend, we had over 3,000 tests done with only 4 positives statewide. We just got the reports from this morning, approximately 1,300 tests with just 2 positives. So the methods of trying to contain the spread of the virus are working. Now we have to figure out how we keep that going as we move forward into more economic activity. So if we go to next slide, please. So you see that it's important. These are some of the important metrics, right? So you have the active caseloads, you have testing. Active caseloads continue to go down. Active testing we're ramping up. We have some of the highest percentages of testing per population. So we have mandatory quarantine that was started in the very beginning, and we actually have some of the best tracing systems in place in the nation, and that really helps control the spread and containment of who's been in contact when they've been infected. And so the other thing that they keep in place in their metrics is the hospital capacity. We know that the hospitals have made a tremendous sacrifice in how they've been conducting business compared to the past, but it all plays into the capacity and how we look at the metrics as we go forward. The symptomatic people, we've had some really positive cases. I should say positive results from some cases that really could have exploded the wrong way, specifically in our corrections institutions down in Lemon Creek and at Goose Creek, to where we found out that some of the corrections officers were infected, but miraculously there's been no inmate tested positive in the state at all. I think we're one of the only states in the union where that we can say that, and it really is a testament to early action to prevent people going in and out of the correction facilities unless they're being tested. And so we've really had a lot of positive impact on being able to trace and test and quarantine and prevent outbreaks. Next slide, please. And so as we talk about, economic activity, which is really what today's about, we look at what the Congress has done at the national level, with the distribution of the $1,200 per individual, the 350 billion approximately that they've made available to the Paycheck Protection Act, and then acting again with another 310 billion, and the state had received from the CARES Act, approximately 1.25 billion. And so from the federal side and to the state side, we see all kinds of activity and monies available to help impact community businesses within all communities across Alaska. So next slide, please. So if you see this, you can see the Paycheck Protection Act is probably the biggest one, and you see the numbers that have been processed in Alaska, approximately 4,800 the first round for the Paycheck Protection, and then another 4,700 in the second round. And then you have the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Funds, which are a little bit smaller for the smaller operators. But you can see that the amount of money that the Small Business Administration has made available to the state, it's really staggering. And we hope to see that has had an impact in stabilizing some businesses as they've endured these last 7 to 8 weeks. The SBA typically, in an annual year before this year, the SBA typically has about a $60 million portfolio in the state of Alaska. So you see the impact of what this has done in terms of the magnitude of the SBA's involvement. I think we need to all recognize that the Chamber in Fairbanks and chambers all across Alaska have really stepped up to try to help people and facilitate the process for small businesses and individuals that have their businesses to understand the SBA guidelines and to help them as they go through that process, as well as, there's no question we need to extend our gratitude to the congressional delegation, Murkowski, Sullivan, and Young, as they've continually to put forward some of the issues that we have in Alaska so that we can have the flexibility to address them. We know that there's issues with the SBA loans. They take a long time. The Paycheck Protection doesn't always mesh well with some of the programs. And we also know that it's a long, arduous process. It is a government program. It takes a long time. And so that's where we in the state have decided to try to facilitate that. And next slide, please. And as the governor decided to help allocate the money, the 1.25 billion that came directly to the state of Alaska. And so you can see it really falls into these categories, small business assistance, the health care, which is really two things. One to help the state on what they have spent, one to help the state and communities on what they're spending now. And then also the health piece is a contingency because we really don't know what's going to happen into the future. And then there's the 10 million that was set aside for the homeless assistance, and that's really to help prevent homelessness, not necessarily to the homelessness constituencies that we have that have support, but this is to try to help people that won't lose their homes during this period of time. And the nonprofit support, of course, we know the nonprofits have all stepped up to try to help and prevent people from suffering, whether it be for the food shelter, for the homeless shelters, or for food delivery to some of the senior citizens. It's been quite a bit. And then really the biggest piece is this local government support program that the governor decided to follow the guidelines of the CARES Act, to which 45% of the money that goes to the state should be made available to municipalities. And so there's a couple of things that's important about this is, the legislature took action last night and approved that distribution plan that the governor put forward. And so now the now we go into the phase of trying to be expedient and get these funds out into the communities. So we'll be circulating this week to the local municipalities, the grant agreements, but more importantly for your group, for the chamber group, that $290 million on how it will become available. And I think it's important that I take a little bit of time to explain this to you. So next slide, please. So the $290 million will be facilitated through the Department of Commerce and through AIDEA. And AIDEA is going to do a direct grant program to small businesses. And we'll be processing, the beginning will be processed through Credit Union One. There'll be an application program. So Credit Union One will be the grant processor. And so individuals can make application to Credit Union One and any other institution that may submit proposals to be a grant administrator as well. But there's a couple of things that are important. Is this is to be made available to entities that don't qualify for the Paycheck Protection and or for the Economic Injury and Disaster Assistance Fund. And so lots of the businesses that work in Alaska are seasonal. This has to be smaller than 50 employees. And it can be used, it's a grant money, not a loan program, which is different than the PPP and or the AIDEA programs run by SBA. So the AIDEA also has already approved a $25 million program called the Alaska SAFE program, which has been up and running for a month. And it's available for businesses to borrow. That's actually a loan program that they can borrow up to $1 million at low interest rates. And you can check with AIDEA to apply for that. So these are a couple of unique programs that the governor has worked with AIDEA and worked with the banking community to try to get these funds out to provide relief to those businesses that need it in a quick way that hasn't been able to qualify for the SBA programs. So some of the other things that AIDEA did, they already have a series of existing loan programs. Next slide, please. And AIDEA has, for those that have the ability to actually borrow money or looking for loan funds, AIDEA has over 20 loan programs within the state that are pretty well funded and available to small businesses now. The Small Business Economic Development Loan Fund is a loan up to $300,000. What they call the RDIF, Rural Development Initiative Fund, can be up to $300,000 for a business with 2 or more. And then the Micro Loan Fund, which a lot of people have used over the years, is pretty well funded. It's also available for people to have loans to help them through this period of time. And so the 3 programs right now have about 1,900 loans in their portfolio with about a $200 million total portfolio value. So if you can see that the $290 million that we put in through the CARES Act is almost doubling the amount of effort that the state wants to be available to help small businesses. And so a lot of this information will be available on the Department of Economic Development's website through the State Department of Commerce. And I think that, if you have people that are interested in it, to take a look. It's our intent to try to get this money out as quickly as we can, but we all know that government is challenging sometimes to work expediently, but we're all focused on trying to get this money into the community as fast as we can. Next slide, please. And I think, some of the other things that we've done during this period of time is, we have, I think, about 240 regulations that have been suspended during this period of time. Has to do with fees, inspections, reporting requirements that the governor has looked at to try to provide immediate relief to individuals and small businesses across the state. We also expedited the implementation of the telehealth services and providing monies for that to help communities that use telehealth and lower the cost and increase the access to telemedicine in certain regions. And then there was also, the governor signed the loosening of for a temporary time frame, the professional licensing, so that we could get more qualified individuals to be available to help during this time of need. But most of that was around the medical community. And then they were suspended the certificate of need requirement in the event that came up. But we have, like I said, mentioned earlier, we really haven't suffered so much from the medical crisis as we are now trying to deal with the economic recovery. So I think that, as we go forward, we need to continue to work to try to find a way to look at how the metrics impact. And what I mean by metrics, I mean the health metrics and how they interrelate with the mandates. And that's really how the governor is going to make the determination with advice from the medical officers, as well as with advice from the CDC as we move forward into easing these restrictions on the economy. Next slide, please. So, I want to appreciate the time. I hope I give you some information, at least spark some questions from you. I'll be available to answer questions, Sabrina, if there's some that come forward. But it's kind of a quick review of what we're trying to accomplish here and how these metrics fall into place in terms of the easing of the mandates. So, we really can't predict what's going to happen. It's really, we're just sort of working through this together, and as people continue to practice good social distancing, people continue to work together to help maintain, that they stay safe and their family members stay safe and their neighbors stay safe. I think that's important. We all know what the travel restrictions have done to our state's economy, and we're trying to find ways to ease that. But it goes back to my first statement. We know that the travel restrictions have prevented us from having a serious medical impact, but we need to find a way to ease that back in, because our economy is so dependent on that. So with that, I appreciate your attention, and I'll be available to try to answer questions, Sabrina, so thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ben. We certainly appreciate all the information. Yes, we will take questions now from our chamber community through the chat. I'll go ahead and lead off. My question really stems around education. I know there's been talk between Commissioner Crum and Commissioner Johnson about when and how schools will reopen. And of course, the president made some comments this weekend about getting students back to school. Can you share anything at this time related to the governor's plans to reopen our schools, public and private?
So, so the school year, and I know there's a lot of discussion going on between Commissioner Johnson and the governor, and sort of following what's being handed down from the national level. But I think it's really, it's almost a wait and see what we can do. I know the governor, as an educator, knows the importance of the school experience for our young children and for our and for everybody. So I don't think that they've made any concrete plans. The metrics are going to play a big part of that. I think at the same time, there's a lot of initiative towards distance learning and how that can enhance our learning experience in Alaska. We've been at the forefront of that for quite a while, given our geographic challenges. So I think that will continue. But I also know that schools play an important role in our society, and I know the governor wants to try to get back to that normalcy with certainty, but it's kind of an uncertain time. It's really not a good answer, but it's about where we are right now.
Sometimes that's where we are in today's world. So now Janelle will go ahead and moderate our questions from our viewers. Thanks again.
Okay, and we do have several questions that have come in so far on the chat. So I think I'll sort of start with the big picture and then work our way down into there's several detailed questions about what you mentioned on some of the slides. So sort of from a high level, someone mentioned that, you know, loans and grants are helpful for keeping a lot of the businesses kind of going for the time being, but until we start rebuilding the overall economy, that is still only going to be a temporary measure. So they asked, when can we expect to see travel restrictions relaxed, for example, so that we can start getting visitors back in and you know, getting some of those economic drivers moving?
So that's the question that we're trying to get the metrics to, and you sort of have to look outside our sphere to understand, you know, the health metrics of and the rate of cases in the lower 48. You know, so if we wanted to say come through Seattle or Chicago or Minneapolis, what are the rates of cases doing there and how are they impacting us? And so, I mean, it's on the governor's agenda every day to try to make determination of when can we start easing these interstate travel restrictions. And I think that, like I said, you'll see how we manage internally. That's why I said I think this upcoming weekend and you know, a week from now, if the metrics continue where our testing increases and our number of positives stay flat, I think you'll see you know, an interpretation and an evaluation towards the middle to the end of part of next week for that phase 3. And I think the intent is to try to get our local economy functioning properly and everybody back to work, and then maybe easing the restrictions. And it might be considered to be easing restrictions from certain areas that have low rates of infection or low curve, you know, versus some areas that people coming from high infection rate areas or hot spots, there may be travel restrictions limited there. So I don't have an answer to that, but we know that it's important, and we know that we want to try to get the visitors here for this summer for those that can still either drive up or fly in and experience our Alaskan summer and all we have to offer. So I don't have a definitive answer when that will happen, but believe me, we're looking at all the metrics all the time on it.
Okay. And speaking of some of the requirements, there was a question about on the regulatory suspension slide, it mentioned suspending CON requirements, C-O-N. Someone did put some further information about that into the chat, but can you explain what that CON requirement is and how that would impact the economic recovery?
So that's a pretty specific to the medical community. It's called a certificate of need. So if you have a certain type of medical facilities that may be needed, you know, in the event that there was a large outbreak in some area, and you needed to have a certain type of medical, like imaging or so it's an application pretty specific to the medical community. So that's called the certificate of need, and it was waived during this period of time during the emergency. There's been no application of that yet. It's for hospitals and but it's a pretty arduous process, specifically related to the medical community.
Okay, and the question actually that relates to the medical community as well says, with the governor now permitting physicians and dentists to perform elective procedures with the caveat that the patient must have a negative COVID ID test or COVID-19 test, excuse me, within the last 48 hours. That has been a challenge in Fairbanks to get timely test results in order to get those results back within that 48-hour window. Is there anything that you or the governor or the administration can do to help the medical and dental professionals to make that process more feasible so that they can get back to business?
You know, that's been a challenging topic since the elective procedure came into place. And in full disclosure, I'm really not that versed up. I'm not on the medical mandate team, so I don't know, but I do know that a lot of people have spent a lot of time trying to address that, and I think they came up with some modifications to that this week. I know Dr. Zink is traveling around the state right now, but I can talk to Commissioner Crum, and I would suggest he would have the answer on that. I don't have the answer. We do know that's a challenge. We've had a lot of people trying to take a look at that in terms of, you know, the mandatory COVID negative in order to have some of those procedures done. And we also know that it takes sometimes 5, 6, 7, 8 days until you get your test back. So, like I said, my apologies for not being the mandate experts, especially with the medical side, but I do know there's lots of people looking at that.
Great. Well, to go in a different direction, maybe that would be a little bit more in your area of expertise, hopefully. The AIDEA grant that you talked about, there's two questions that I think perhaps might go together somewhat. Are these grants going to be available to nonprofits such as 501c3 or 501c6? I know that we specifically have a few 501c6 organizations locally that were excluded from some of the national programs. And when would you expect guidelines that would answer that type of question to be available for those grants?
But I think the grants are going to be available for any entity that makes application. You know, there's the $50 million that goes towards human services nonprofits, and then there's other. Of course, we know there's other nonprofits that provide other services and memberships or that. But the answer is that they can make application, and we believe that the applications are targeted to be being able to be received by Credit Union 1, I believe, by the end of the week. So, like I said, Credit Union 1, it will be the one that's processing the first few tranches of the loan application. And we're also going to put the request for proposal for other loan processors to come out that meet the same terms in terms of the processing agreement that we have with Credit Union 1. So there'll be some more information coming out the Department of Commerce and Economic Development webpage, as well as I believe that we have Commissioner Johnson and Commissioner Anderson and the AIDEA representatives are going to be involved with the governor's press availability tomorrow night, Wednesday night, to talk about how small businesses and or nonprofits that are either, you said 503s or 506s that can make application for that.
Okay, thanks. Another question, which this one I think is a little bit of a sleeper issue right now, that there's a lot of different things people are focusing on, but childcare is becoming a real barrier to a lot of businesses opening back up. So if day camps are closed or canceled, if daycare, childcare facilities are closed, or they have to severely limit the number of children that they can accept, you know, how can that be addressed in the plans for overall opening back up the economy? And I know this is an issue that our Education and Workforce Development Committee is really focusing on right now, because they think it's going to be a big barrier for a lot of businesses.
So you're right. That has been in what they call pardon me, CARES, I believe it was CARES 2. You know, so the Corona Virus Relief Act that came out of Congress was actually in 4 different sectors of passage. And in CARES 2, there was money made available to the state and actually the plan was just announced last night through Health and Social Services, a grant program for child care providers. I think it was $10.5 million that's going to be made available to help get child care facilities back up and running, so that can move forward. So we recognize that that's a challenge. We recognize that that's a lot of people. It's one of the unintended consequences of what happened was, nobody went to work, so nobody took them to child care, and now everybody wants to go back to work, and the child care providers have had to do other things. And so Commissioner Crum made that announcement last night, that program is now underway, and hopefully those programs will start being able to find assistance to get back going. Again, that's under Commissioner Crum. I wish I had a lifeline to call him, but I don't. But we know that that's an issue, and money was announced last night for that one.
Okay, we will certainly follow up with the commissioner on that. Another question, since you mentioned Alaska has done pretty well in comparison to a lot of the lower 48 states in terms of containing, controlling the outbreak, and really minimizing the spread. I know there was some discussion recently about easing some of the intrastate travel restrictions, so people moving within the state of Alaska. Has there been any progress on that?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that Mandate 18 was released last night. That has to do with intrastate travel, travel on the road system, and travel around in the communities. We're trying to ease the restriction for those that can travel back and forth, say to go sport fishing, or to go hunting, or to go travel to do some campground. So the answer is that Mandate 18 was put up on the web last night, and it does ease intrastate travel. One of the challenges we have is because of the remoteness, and because some of our communities are so isolated. There's still some attachments and some addendums that allow rural communities to continue to have restrictive travel in and out of their communities, because there's the fear, and it's really based on a metric that says, does the community have the medical facilities available? Whereas some only have a clinic, some have a certain number of beds, some have a full care access to a full full critical care facility. But the answer to that is yes. It was posted last night on the webpage. Mandate 18 for intrastate travel has been eased quite a bit.
Okay, and sorry, this one's just coming in. Many businesses have expressed frustration about the short timeline for the phases of reopening. The guidelines will be released just hours before the phase is effective. It's making it complicated for businesses to be prepared, with the appropriate plans, with the appropriate supplies, to be ready to respond and open, when that becomes available. So can you speak at all to the timeline for future phases? Will there be any opportunity to define them and publish guidelines ahead of the effective date so that we can all be a bit more prepared?
Well, that's a challenging question. Goes back to sort of the framework that they're working under, which is this 14-day period that they really believe that after one phase of an opening, we need to wait to see 14 days to see what kind of impact that's had on the state and the community in terms of the active cases and the spread. So, and then, if we did that, so that would be Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we would look to see would we move to phase 3. And I think it's the governor's. we're really in uncharted territory. So I think it's the governor's perspective to say, look, if we announce an opening, it's better to say we're announced the opening than to say, oh, we're going to announce an opening on Friday for next Friday. So that's a tough one to address because of the uncertainty around it. And I know the governor's eager to allow the economy to open, and so this kind of like all of a sudden, we get the metrics come in at day 10. If we'd have followed the 14-day time period, the state would not have. He wouldn't have announced the opening until yesterday, Monday. But things were going so well, he made the determination to announce an opening to phase 2 on Thursday for Friday. So I wish I could give you a better answer, but I don't have a better answer for that.
We certainly do appreciate that it's a complicated time, and we're all interested to see how things evolve from here. So we do have a few more questions, but I know that we're a little short on time. So I think maybe what we'll do is compile the rest, and perhaps we can share those with you outside of this format and see if we can get back to some folks.
That'd be fine. Yeah, if you send them along, we can try to get them back. In the contact, we can try to respond and get the answers back. Like I said, I wish I had more definitive answers for you guys. There's a lot of uncertainty. We know that. We're doing the best we can. We appreciate everybody's understanding. We appreciate everybody's contribution to get us where we are now. And with that, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. So have a great day.
Okay, thanks so much again, Senator Stevens. I echo Janelle. We certainly appreciate the hard work and that you and the rest of the governor's team are doing right now to balance not only the best interests of public health, but that of our state's economy, and we empathize with the challenge of the uncertainty. So again, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll certainly stay in touch. So I would now like to invite Alyssa Rodriguez of Alaska MEP to speak. She's here to tell us a little about Alaskan personal protection equipment, now commonly known as PPE, which businesses are producing in state, and how you can request if you and your business are in need. Welcome, Alyssa.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all really quickly about kind of what we're doing in terms of trying to make sure that everybody's got access to the PPE that they need. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So I've spoken to this group before really briefly about kind of what the MEP is and what we do. So I'll just leave it to say that during normal times, if you will, we are an organization that helps manufacturers to succeed in really whatever way they need, whether it's business assistance or finding new markets, et cetera. That's kind of what we're here for. And that's how we got into this business of helping to coordinate PPE production and connecting to the folks who need it. Next slide, please. So what we've done thus far, and this is a little bit old, but we've connected Alaska manufacturers to healthcare providers and private businesses that need PPE, and we've facilitated the connection and delivery of over 10,000 masks, over 25 gallons of hand sanitizer, over 400 face shields at this point, over 2,000 Tyvek coveralls, more than 700 gowns. There has been so much PPE that's been made in this state. It's really been dramatic and inspiring that all of these manufacturers who never made PPE before really stepped up to the plate as soon as COVID-19, and in some cases even before it really hit Alaska, because they saw that there was going to be a need. They knew that Alaskans would need access to PPE and really just kind of saw the writing on the wall that there wasn't going to be enough. Next slide, please. So what we've been doing thus far, the biggest thing that we've been doing is acting in this matchmaking role. We are helping our manufacturers with their supply chains. So, in order to make alcohol, you need sugar and things like that. And there have been challenges there in getting enough. But in terms of face masks, agreeing on a design for folks across Alaska so we could have that consistency in what's being delivered, trying to make sure that manufacturers have the appropriate cloth This has been a very educational experience. Even when you use cotton masks, not all cotton is the same cotton. And trying to make sure that our manufacturers have access to the raw materials that make the best PPE as possible has been a challenge, but one that we've luckily been able to help with. So for example, Providence Healthcare has surgical wrap that's sterile, never touched a patient. And so we can take that surgical wrap, we can connect manufacturers with it, and then we can make sure that they actually are able to make surgical masks instead of just cloth masks. But again, let's just skip to the next slide. Blast through this. I don't want to waste people's time. We've already talked about who Alaska's manufacturers are. So if you can go to the next one. So we've got seafood processors, lots of food manufacturers, keep going. Alcohol, whether it's breweries or distilleries who've switched to making PPE, more food processors who've been considered critical infrastructure and who've been putting themselves at risk throughout this entire pandemic to make sure that we have the food that we need produced in state. They've been users of PPE, so we're helping with those who produce. Our clothing manufacturers have really stepped up and made a lot of the PPE that we've had in state. Next. And then fabricators. So a lot of folks who we don't necessarily consider manufacturing, I think when we just typically think of manufacturing Alaska, fabricators are some of our most numerous manufacturers in the state. And a lot of them have stepped up. They do use PPE regularly, and they've had at least some of the materials necessary to make PPE. And so they've really switched gears into producing face shields and things like that. In some cases, they've produced beds for some of the temporary shelters and quarantine spaces. Next slide, please. So as we move to restart and recovery, there were a lot of questions about that. And Ben Stevens spoke about this kind of restarting of our economy. We're seeing an increased need for PPE from businesses and healthcare providers. And that's what we're here for. So right now, the Alaska MEP is here to help connect private businesses and healthcare providers with PPE, primarily that's being made in state, but we are also hiring for a new position for someone who can help to coordinate even more globally than that, to really help people to identify and manage this new piece of our collective supply chains that we'll need going forward. Whether you're a restaurateur or a tourism operator, you're going to need some level of PPE for quite a long time. And so this is going to be a regular part of your supply chain. So if you're using an Alaska manufacturer, as they switch back to maybe making clothing or food or metal fabrication, now you have another hole in your supply chain. And so this new person that we're going to be hiring can help you to connect to a kind of a more permanent piece of your supply chain, whether that's out of state, out of country, using local distributors as much as possible, and help you to navigate what kind of PPE you need. Do you need just a cloth mask, or in your field, do you really need an N95? So as these health mandates come out, trying to make sure that our businesses and healthcare providers can comply, know how to comply, and know where to go to get it. Next slide, please. So the place to go in order to request PPE, at least from us, I know there's a handful of other folks, and we're trying to work with others as much as we can. But if you go to alaska-mep.com, there's a button right there that says request to purchase PPE, and we will connect you with a manufacturer. You just have to tell us what you need, how much, and by when. There's a small form to fill out, and we talk to all of our manufacturers, and then we connect you one-on-one with just the one person who can meet your need. And with that, I will stop. Thank you.
Wow, that's great, Alyssa. So nice to know that as we reopen businesses and we all return to work, that we have access to those resources in state. Well, that concludes our presentation. For those of you that would have normally attended our luncheon and or purchased 50/50 tickets, I'd like to humbly suggest that you take that money and spend it with a local business or donate it to a nonprofit that's providing critical and basic needs during these challenging times. And while I've been plugging Takeout Tuesday for the past several weeks, you can now get outside to enjoy some of our local restaurants. So let's work together to get our economy rolling again and eat local as summer begins. We always appreciate your continued participation, and we look forward to interacting with you next week when we will hear from my good friend Mike Richards of RJG as he presents Understanding PPP Loan Forgiveness. So please stay tuned to our website and twice weekly newsletter, The Scoop, for information about upcoming presentations and advocacy. Thanks so much, Fairbanks. Be well.